afternoon. I am delighted to have with us today Colonel Viktor Siromakha, the Defense, Naval and Air Attaché of Ukraine to Canada. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. First of all, pleased to be here with you. We had same briefing probably 2 years ago in May 2020. A lot of change since that time, but in the same time my top task now to deliver you what is going on in Ukraine from my perspective as a Defense Attaché of Ukraine to Canada. So let me start from the very beginning. Have a look at these faces. That's probably familiar faces of Mr. Putin and his top friends, like Minister of Foreign Affairs and spoken head of Ministry of Defense of Russia. And they've been showing us that if Russia wants to invade Ukraine, it will be an easy ride. Putin has been always claiming that Russia is a peaceful country. Lavrov stated that no plans to invade Ukraine, and General Konashenko was absolutely sure that if Russia decides to go into Ukraine, it will be an easy ride with minimal losses. Frankly speaking, we've been thinking about little and splendid war. But actually, in reality, became a road to hell for them. So we move now to the very last day before war started. That's few pictures, very important pictures as for me. Have a look, please. If you next time see tanks staying so close, one by one, in the field, and helicopters, please have a look at this picture in the center. Helicopter staying in one line, ready for a quick takeoff. And that's the particular detachment of helicopters that Russians used to attack our Hostomel airfield. It's in Kiev region. Pictures below, that's some convoys of Russian GRU units just across the border on the territory of Russia, but pointed on Kharkiv region and main battle tanks as well. Picture on the right top, that's I would say territory of Belarus, and that's a medevac units. So we have been deploying, Russians have been deploying these units as close as possible to the border in order to make a fast, furious invasion. So next time you see helicopters staying in one line, please be advised that something is about to begin. Next picture, that's a famous president of Belarus, I can say permanent president of the Belarus, Mr. Lukashenko. And he's trying to explain for himself, first of all, and for his generals, for his populations, why the hell Belarus is helping Russia to invade Ukraine. In 2014, our head of National Security Council, Mr. Turchinov, gave a brief call to President Lukashenko and asked him, Russians are invading Ukraine. Russians are trying to capture Crimea. Will you let them to come and strike Ukraine from Belarus, from the territory of Belarus? That time, Lukashenko promised to Mr. Turchinov, no, we are not going to do that. 1 week before war started on February 24, our Minister of Defense, Alexei Reznikov, called one more time to Belarusian Minister of Defense, General Khrenikov, and asked the same questions. Will you let them strike us? Response was no. So then Minister of Defense is lying to the Minister of Defense. It means not such a good relationship of friendship between two nations. And we, Ukrainians and Belarusians, we have been living together centuries and centuries, even before Soviet Union.
Right.
So that's why picture below in the right corner, probably you remember this person, historical person, Mussolini. For us, as of these days, Lukashenko and Putin, that's like same couple like Benito Mussolini and Adolf Hitler. And that's the beginning of war. So instead of little and splendid war, Russian troops faced furious resistance of our defense forces. So a lot of equipment has been destroyed while coming to Kiev, because their main assault was against our capital, with main idea to capture the Kiev city, to destroy our command and control, to eliminate our leadership, and then dictate their own demands. And the first prisoners of war we captured from Russians, they were quite interesting bodies. Picture on the right, that's a roster of men signed in for their participation in combat operations in other states.
In other states.
Not Ukraine, not just Ukraine, other states, plural. And these guys signed in for these future operations. So you remember the developing of the story from the very beginning, how main Russian efforts were focused on Kiev, northern eastern Ukraine, Kharkiv region, definitely from Donetsk region towards the mainland, and incredible move from Crimea in order to get control over sources of fresh water to Crimea. And all this group of forces were marked with the letters Z, O, V, and for those who speak Russian, it means Zov. So for those who don't speak Russians, it means the call or un appel. So let's say the picture of the empire in this corner, it's kind of explanation. Then the empire wants to get his victim, and the empire wants to suck it dry. So that's why they have been trying to get Kiev. Russians have been moving from the east and from the north to get our capital under their control. And Russians, they have been fighting weeks and weeks and weeks until their offensive stalled in northern part of Kiev region. And you remember all these funny pictures of them, or memes of long 50-mile convoy staying in the middle of the forest without clear understanding. Okay, where are we going now? What for? Where level of level of combat casualties was already high, but in the same time, Russians they had to accomplish their initial plan or make some amendments, because huge miscalculations of our resistance and support of these countries was a revelation for them. So it was a clear message for Russian leadership. Wow, what is going on? And what we saw new, that's the new tactic of their Russian Special Operations Forces. These tiny marks on the roofs, on the roads, lampposts, it was obviously for the moves of their special forces, airborne troops, and, for instance, for helicopter pilots. For instance, red cross on the roof, just nearby the chimney, that's definitely for the guy who is about to land on the roof and to stabilize his or her position in order to get the chimney, because if not, even tiny winter will blow up canopy from the roof. The rest of the markings is still reading what was their real purposes, but in the same time, a lot of Russian special operators lost their life in this assault to the downtown Kiev. Here the truck with air defense gun, and they destroyed, we Ukrainians, we destroyed this truck just in the northern Obolon area. So if we compare Ottawa and Kiev, our governmental buildings were located, for instance, on a Parliament Hill.
Right.
And this truck has been destroyed, let's say, nearby Laklimi Casino.
Oh, wow.
So the distance from the actual area of fight to the downtown Kiev was just few kilometers. And definitely the Russians, they have been trying to get downtown Kiev under fire control. Yes, special operations troops could get landed on the roofs and then get under fire control with machine guns and sniper rifles enough of the territory to control the ground. Fights in the area of Hostomel airport, that's excellent defensive operations we've conducted against Russian airborne troops. Yes, their initial success was like media effect. So Russians even brought some journalists from Western medias to cover incredibly fast, brilliant airborne operations.
Right.
But you can name it fast and brilliant and only if it was successful. It doesn't mean operation is successful when you lost a lot of men and then you lost control over the territory or object, airfield. This distance between Hostomel airport and downtown Kiev, that's tiny 15 kilometers. So plan was obvious, to bring special forces to get under control airfield and then to bring Ilyushin 76 full of equipment, airborne guys, BMD, whatever. And this Ka-52 helicopter, that's an interesting story. There are a few pictures of gentlemen, and by the way, the same guy, priest on the top, and this guy in civilian, that's civilian, captured on the spot. Ukrainian origin, excellent Ukrainian language, good cover story, and looks like this body has been living in Ukraine for years. He had all the documents and some very special device for helping helicopter pilots and artillery units to correct their fire support. So JSAT, as they call it. JSAT guys. So very interesting to talk to Russian priests, for instance, even here in Canada, because if these priests are celebrating, for instance, August the 2nd, whatever day, it means they have some military origins and military background. So think twice to drink this shot of vodka with your neighbor Russian priest if he invites you for August the 2nd. So if we are talking about strategic level, that's same. Russia is trying to be recognized as an equal partner by United States, by China. We want to participate actively in these global security issues. We want to get under their control ex-Soviet space and keep it, not only get, but keep it or bring some areas back. But in the same time, looks like if you have to bring more troops as a part of the mobilization, something goes wrong. So it's why their recent announcement to increase the total strength of the armed forces more than 1 million troops. That's a clear indication that strategic goals and ambitions do not coordinate or are not synchronized with the situation on the ground. So it's why partial mobilizations, let's say, officially finished, but still in the process. And Russia is trying to join occupied territories of Ukraine, especially southern part of Kherson region or part of Zaporizhzhya region. But if you have to announce 24 hours curfew, it means you do not control the territory at all. And how you can join these territories if you cannot control even population? I'm not talking about military guys who are still sitting somewhere in safe havens and special force operators, but I'm talking about civilians who can still call to relatives and to talk to right people and share some intelligence. So, and last but not least, that's definitely something new in Russian foreign policy. That's a nuclear blackmail. So you cannot defeat the armed forces of adversary with conventional means. You, as they claimed, Russians claimed they are second armed forces in the world. But if you cannot defeat armed forces of Ukraine, how can you be superpower? We're moving forward. That's current situation on the front line as of these days. Recently, my colleague from Latvia, Defense Attaché of Latvia here, asked me, Victor, do they really have in Kherson region 40 battalion tactical groups or BTGs? And my response is no, they have even more. And we understand how many they have. We understand what's the purpose of this deployment of the troops on this in this particular area of Ukraine, and what could be consequences both for us and for Russians. Interesting situation. They're claiming to get under control full Kherson region, but in the same time they keep control over the half of the territory. And the fact that we Ukrainians destroyed bridges over Dnipro River, and that's a very wide river, by the way, in this particular area. Russians, they're playing interesting game. So they still have units, they still have troops in the area, incredibly challenging logistic support, and our troops, well-trained, well-equipped, and ready to go. But we are trying to move smartly. We are trying to save life of our soldiers. So that's why everything is ahead. So, as I mentioned before, all these incredible strikes against Ukraine with cruise missiles, with multiple launch rocket systems, with ballistic missiles, with drones, like ISR platforms with some kinetic assets, plus loitering munitions. That's the Russian response on our deterrence. That's Russian response on our defensive posture of our armed forces, of our population. For 8 days, Russia launched 68 missiles and 30 drones. So we intercepted 75% of missiles and 40% of drones. So mobilization in Russia is still active, and as of 1st November, yes, they still stuffing the personnel. So in order to create plus probably 130 units. They want to create new reserve units, and then Russians, they want to create at least 31 new formations. Again, Russians, they want to do it, and they're trying to increase the numbers, but the quality of personnel and the morale of these units are under big question mark. Belarus, our neighbor, Russian neighbor, and looks like they are more friendly to Moscow these days. Yes, Belarus is still playing a very interesting game. They understand what could be consequences of Belarusian assault of Ukraine. And they understand that this way to the war with Ukraine for Belarus, it will be a huge mistake for Belarusians for many, many years to come. So that's why Mr. Lukashenko is helping Russia with tanks, with armed vehicles, with ammunition, especially artillery rounds. And we know approximately how many echelons with how many platforms are coming to Russia and what is inside of these platforms. Now a few words about technology. So I have to highlight this particular war is the war of drones and artillery and logistic support. So have a look, please. That's Russians and partially Russians drones. And believe me, armed forces of Russian Federations are using these drones day and night. Absolutely different types: tactical, operational, and even strategic. Have a look at this Orlan 10. Quite good for tactical purposes, incredibly good tool for counter-battery warfare, and we are successfully getting them down. What do we find inside these drones? And that's an interesting picture, because there are still a lot of components from different countries, for instance, from China, from Switzerland, Japan, United States. And next drones I would like to highlight, that's Russian or actually Iranian drones, because Russians, they named these drones Iran, what is actually a flower, but at the same time that's Shahid from Iran, Shahid 136. And that's loitering ammunition, new word in combat warfare. And Mahajer drones, still, we understand that's quite good platform, and Iranians, they've been pretending that we are not shipping these drones from the very beginning. But as of last week, they recognized the fact, or that they have been shipping some, but before war.
Before the war.
Before the war, yes. Good, they are sending these drones to Russia, and we successfully trying to destroy them. It's easier to intercept and destroy cruise missile than Iranian drone. That's ridiculous, but it's a fact. And one more time, then we shut down these drones. We understand that, again, not so Iranian equipment is inside. That's, for instance, engines. Rotax, Austrian company, with some connection to Northern America. So what lessons learned for us, if we are talking about these Iranian drones? That's extremely expensive to destroy these drones with manpads, but air defense or artillery is quite good solution So that's why Germany provided us with Gepard. Good option. Even old Soviet era ZU-22, ZU-23, ZU-20, still good. And picture on the right, that's Ehrlichon, 35 millimeters. So if NATO countries have some in stock,
Right.
that's not the time to get rid of them. They still could be useful. Surface-to-air missiles or air-to-surface missiles, that's another word. So Russian armed forces, they're using their combat aircrafts, and in good day for us, but a bad day for them, for Russians, we destroyed 9 aircrafts in one day. Very popular, very good aircraft, Sukhoi 37, and yes, they use air-to-surface missiles against our targets. But from the very beginning of the conflict, they've been using obsolete bombs, free-falling bombs, FAB 250. So that's kind of generation 4++ aircraft and World War II munition. It's like Terminator 2 and a slingshot. Doesn't work. And if we are talking about new technologies, yes, aircraft, that's good, and for our air defense operators, we can detect and destroy their aircrafts with our available air defense assets. But from our side, from Ukrainians, we received HIMARS. And this radar picture in the middle, top level, that's probably either aircraft or one Smerch missile is coming. And that's a screen of Russian air defense operator.
Right.
But picture below, that's a cloud of targets. It means it's a good launch of HIMARS missiles. And our guys on the ground were happy to see these missiles flying, and that's incredible sounds when it goes. That's like Game of Thrones, famous phrase, Dracarys. Another a very interesting assets, that's UAS Bayraktar TB2. Great thing. With good optic, with good missiles, from the very beginning of war, we have been successfully eliminating Russian air defense. And picture on the right, that's an island, famous Snake Island. Yes, we liberated this island with our artillery, with our air forces, and with support of 2 Bayraktars. Few words about Russian Navy assets. It was extremely hard for us to fight with these ships because our coastal defense was in poor shape from the very beginning. We secured the shore with all available means we had. We brought some additional MLRS systems, and first ship we sank, it was Russian frigate, and we destroyed this frigate with usual BM-21 Grad. Then famous picture of cruiser Moskva, rest in peace. Some additional pictures of auxiliary, by the way, new one, tugboat of Russian Navy fleet, and few Raptors. And these bodies, they have been destroyed by our Ukrainian Bayraktar TB2. Their Russian response was interesting because they understood that Ukrainian US systems are effective tool. So that's why they found creative solution to protect Navy assets. They decided to deploy on board of the ships Army air assets, Panzer, Tor, and some other systems. So that's good indication that their Navy air defense assets doesn't cover enough their ship. Role of social media. That's very important. And guys from Russian media, Krasnaya Zvezda, they committed some stupid things, and we are grateful for them for this. Good speech about delivery of some logistic support to the seaport of Berdyansk. For us, it was like gift from heaven, and we've sent directly to their area .U missiles. One amphibious ship destroyed on the spot, and two were damaged. So social media and OSINT, it's very hard to overestimate. And again, that's the mid of August, and town Saki nearby, not only sea resorts, but Black Sea resorts, but air base Novofedorovka. Few missiles incoming and dozens of aircrafts destroyed. And again, social media. These pictures from the, let's say, Russians who were having sun baths nearby the airfield clearly indicated that target was hit. And few more things, first of all in social media, and then let's say for very, very deep thinking and assessment. Russia captured nuclear power plant. For the very first time in the history, armed forces of foreign state captured not the castle or not military base of seaport, that's nuclear power plant. And you cannot hide it in your pocket. And with history of Ukraine and the name Chernobyl since 1986 became a symbol of disaster. So nuclear holocaust that's just nearby, like these Russian military trucks nearby the active zone of reactors. So the distance between military trucks and the red square that's physical reactor was tiny, 120 meters. And if we are talking about current losses of Russian armed forces in this war, statistics is very sad for them. That's more than 77,000 skeleton soldiers, different ages, 30, 40, 50 years old, young airborne guides, and even conscripts. Yes, Russia has lost conscripts in this war. For instance, we have the evidences that first wave of professional airborne troops assaulting Kiev, they were on the edge, front units. Rear units, they're meant with some conscripts who were bringing their parade uniform in their APCs, infantry fighting vehicles. So they lost their lives, and our soldiers, then they revealed that these guys have been bringing parade uniform. It gave us revelation that probably that was really little splendid war in their minds, but instead of this, it was a hell in Kiev region on the way to our capital. So for 10 years, USSR lost 118 aircrafts in 10 years in Afghanistan. In the same time, per 9 months, Ukrainian armed forces destroyed 278 combat aircrafts. Yes, Russians are trying to counter-offense, to conduct counter-offensive operations certain areas of the front line, and intensity of fights increased, seriously increased, especially during last 2 weeks. I would say 3 times more. So in certain areas of front line, they have 80 actions, 80 assaults per day. That's a picture why Russians they are so desperate. The yellow picture, that's liberated territory. Territory liberated by armed forces of Ukraine since the beginning of September this year. 9,000 square kilometers in 2 months. That's not bad. Yes, our territory still requires, 1/3 of our territory requires demining. That's almost 200 square kilometers. Level of support of actions of the president, of the armed forces in our society is extremely high, 86%. And we are bringing back not only land and territories, we are bringing back souls, we are bringing back our prisoners of war. 978 men came back home as of these days. So the Russians' goals are still the same: to defeat Ukraine, to dictate their demands to NATO, and to get their troops on the boundaries of the Donetsk and Kherson region, as well as Zaporizhzhya as well. But that's not working. That's not working, and it will never happen. So why it will never happen? Because we have great support of our friends. We have Canadian support as well, because me, as a defense attaché, I would like to say a few words to Minister Anand, to Chief Defense Staff General Air, that thank you very much for the training we receiving from Canada. 33,000 troops were trained by Canadians in Ukraine during Operation Unifier, and now Interflex in United Kingdom still doing the same. These pictures, that's brilliant explanations, we are doing well. And for you guys on the left, one of them will become, I do believe, will become Chief Defense Staff of Canadian Armed Forces. That's few things we desperately need now. So, as I mentioned before, that's the war of artillery, that's the war of drones. So that's why artillery shells, that's top priority for us now. And of course, what Canada and how Canada can help us with, that's armed vehicles.
Right.
Domestic production is extremely good tool to secure future. So that's why GDLS with ACSVs, we are looking forward to get some additional vehicles like LAV 6 with 25mm guns, and these APC Senatos from Rochelle. They're extremely good as well. So here, that's the last slide of my presentation, and St. Antlo and St. Javelin, that's the icons. Our people in Ukraine, they're praying for these anti-tank assets. That's miracle. That's miracle how we stopped Russian tanks just 15-20 kilometers from Kiev. And HIMARS o'clock, that's already our reality. Then our guys see these bodies, it means victory is nearby. M777 howitzers, and by the way, we received some of these howitzers from Canada as well.
Right.
They're extremely good. And anti-tank assets, Ukrainian origin, like Stugna, were still good as well. So all these assets, all this weapon, is helping Ukraine to stay independent, to stay sovereign, and to defeat the enemy.
Well, thank you, Colonel. I have a few questions here to carry on with the review. How would you describe the present situation for Ukraine?
Very good question, thank you. So, first initial cavalry attack of Russians in February 24, with additional support of everything they had, with cruise missile strikes, with cyber, they haven't reached their goals. So that's why our successful defensive operations with support of NATO countries helped us to stabilize the situation on the front line, recapture initiative, and get them out of some areas of our country. So 9,000 kilometers liberated, 1/3 of our territory requires demining, and we are still trying to get under control, full control, all their occupied areas. First of all, we are doing great in Kharkiv region and in area of Lugansk region. We are trying to get back control over Kherson city, but that doesn't mean we are desperately running in the city. No, we understand that there are some gifts, so-called gifts from Russians to our soldiers, so we are trying to move smartly. Looks like winter is coming, and Russians, they understood that they cannot defeat us militarily, and for us it's quite hard to defeat them as well. But the level of support we have from our NATO friends is incredibly good. So that's why Russia is trying to reschedule the perception of Russian populations what is going on. It's not a war against Ukraine anymore. They are claiming they are fighting with NATO.
Interesting. So reflecting upon the events of the past months, could you comment on Russian disruption and disinformation operations, and in particular the attempt to kill or capture President Zelensky?
Yes, definitely President was target number one for all the special force operatives while first weeks of invasion. We had these sleeping cells before invasion in our Kiev city, and the fights we had with these sleeping cells, they were throughout all our main avenue of our city, Prospect Peremogi. That's, frankly speaking, like half an hour drive from western part of Kiev
Right.
to the downtown. So Russians, they have been trying to get as fast as they can to the downtown in order to get under control their city with governmental buildings, area of governmental buildings, and of course presidential office. And President Zelensky, he has been target number one, especially for special forces of Russian armed forces. So the reason why President decided to stay in Kiev, it was extremely dangerous. It was probably the best case scenario for Russians to keep them in and then to either to arrest him or kill him. But if, for instance, President of Ukraine could accept the proposal of our foreign friends and to leave the city, it would have had an incredibly bad impact on morale of our troops. So President told, no, I'm staying. So that's why center of gravity of defensive operations was definitely the President Zelensky. And all this disinformation campaign, it's interesting because the reason why Russia started this war was like their initial intention to protect populations of
Right.
Donbass, of Russian proxies. They've been claiming that they're protecting Donbass from massacres like Serbia, which happened under Milosevic,
Yes.
like in Srebrenica. They have been claiming they are about to protect the people of Donbass. But instead of this, they committed war crimes in Bucha. They committed war crimes in Irpin. And in multiple towns and villages of Ukraine, there are hundreds of the graves. People tortured, killed on the spot. And definitely you saw reports of UN agencies. And it's incredibly difficult to undermine the authority of these agencies. And it's incredibly difficult to undermine the video that Russian soldiers are
Right.
killing civilians. That's a highway. That's a highway from Kiev to Zhytomyr. Incredibly good new highway. And people, civilians, men and women with kids, they've been trying to leave the capital. And Russian soldiers on APCs, they've been standing in the gas stations and they've been hitting every civilian vehicle without any mercy to the passengers. What is it unless it's war crime? What is it unless it's this huge genocide? And in order to give additional morale to their troops, they started naming us Ukrainians, our armed forces, like Немцы, Germans, in order to make this parallel
Right.
to World War II. And these days, Germany is helping to protect our sky against Russian cruise missiles.
How effective are the loiter munitions, and how can they be defeated?
Loitering munitions now is extremely effective, especially if you have good ISR platforms and if you use loitering munitions, for instance, two drones simultaneously. One is for ISR purposes and another for direct kinetic hit. You can use it easily unless enemy has good EW assets. Because with good protection of EW, loitering munitions, not so effective. What we use as an option to loitering munitions, that's quadricopters and octocopters with
All right.
absolutely different types of charges. Hand grenades and some tiny but very creative devices we developed ourselves, we Ukrainians, and some devices we are receiving from our friends as well. And we use these charges extremely well in order to show that support of local populations is not so good for Russians, especially in the areas occupied by Russians.
What would you assess at the present time as crucial for Ukrainians' continuing success?
We have to survive the winter. And we have to keep the unity of our Western friends, because Russia, it's like cancer. If Russia eats Ukraine, cancer, you cannot slow down cancer only unless you have a good chemistry. So boundaries are not about to stop Russia. Borders are not stopping Russia at all. Have a look on cyber activities. Have a look at what is going on with all these artificial flows of migrants. So all these hits against Ukrainian civil infrastructure, it has a clear purpose: to push out Ukrainian population, civilians, men, women, kids, out of Ukraine somewhere else. Somewhere else, that's where? That's Europe. So we have seen it before in Syria. And now we understand that Russia is wargaming same scenario: to create a nightmare, to create disaster, to blame somebody else for this, and then to push some envelope for negotiation. And the unity of Western support of Ukraine is crucial for this. So we need air defense assets in order to protect our sky, in order to protect our critical infrastructure, in order to protect lives of civilians. We need artillery and additional ammunition for artillery, all types, and of course maneuverability. Because once winter is over, we have to conduct further operations and restore our sovereignty, and we have to restore the control over all our territories occupied by Russia as of now.
In your presentation, you alluded to the FSB, the Russian intelligence service, of having deep cover agents. How has the Ukrainian government countered this intelligence subversion and sabotage threat?
That's really, really good questions, because if you have a Russian Special Force operator or FSB operator with good language skills, maybe because he has or she has Ukrainian origins, the language probably is good enough. So if we make some parallels, it's like Camp X with Ontario. You remember World War II?
Yes.
So the idea was simple: to bring Canadians, French-speaking Canadians from Quebec, to train them properly, and then to send to France for resistance. So Russians, they have been sending agents to Ukraine and operators. And the easiest way was to recognize the Special Force operator or operator of FSB. It's language test. Just magic Ukrainian word "palyanitsa," what means piece of bread. But that's unbelievable, but the Russians, they cannot pronounce it correctly. And we've seen multiple videos of first initial interrogations of these suspected operators. Just, man, just tell it, palyanitsa. Palyanitsa, welcome, buddy. That's an easy way. But in the same time, human, there's always human. And yes, they have their experience, techniques, and they work in the territory, but in the same time, the pattern is the pattern. So quite easy to use modern technologies to intercept communications. So if you recall all these World War II movies with black van, with antennas moving around the city in the midnight, we still use these capabilities. But modern technology plus some elements of artificial issues.
Right.
So we can intercept it, we can read it, and when we can locate and use this information to capture the agents. So links between humans, still links, and that's the easiest way to get it under control.
Well, as a professional officer, can you comment upon the failure of the Russian senior military staff to provide a proper intelligence preparation of the Ukraine environment? It appears that this vital stage for planning purposes was grossly misinformed or politicized, particularly when we saw the shall we say, the discussions between Mr. Putin and his senior political and military advisors just prior to the invasion.
I remember this interesting conversation between President Putin and Mr. Naryshkin.
Mm-hmm.
Probably he was the bravest man among Putin's friends or top officials who was desperately trying to deliver his message, like his warning message. We should think twice before we open this box of Pandora. And probably Mr. Naryshkin was the only guy who decided to say magic phrase, "Have a look, the king is naked."
Mm-hmm.
So probably Russian intelligence officers and intelligence agencies, we've been too deep in this, let's say, messaging,
Right.
absolutely separate from reality. So they created a picture that all their soldiers will be greeted in Ukraine with icons, with bread, then salt. But our Ukrainian women, they had very open discussions with Russian soldiers in balaclavas.
Right.
And Ukrainian women, they have been proposing some grains or sunflower seeds. You will die in Ukraine, please put these seeds in your pocket, because in spring we want to understand where is your body. That was incredible, huge intelligence miscalculation.
Right.
So that's why these internal fights between Russian intelligence agencies absolutely separated from reality. That was the origin of disaster Russia is now passing. And probably that will be the main origin of Russian defeat in this campaign.
Lastly, can you comment on the continuing failure of the Russian military in its subsequent operations in Ukraine?
First of all, victory is still far. And you remember the story of World War II and from USSR, that's first of all a great patriotic war that started in 1941. On 1943 it was Stalingrad.
Yes.
But again, why it's happened? Because in the end of December of 1941, German tanks have been staying just a few kilometers from Moscow. Soviet Union at that time, with support of all the populations of Soviet Union, and with support of United States, United Kingdom, Lend-Lease programs, they generated enough forces to get out German troops, Nazi troops, from the territory, from the soil of Soviet Union. As of now, situation is absolutely opposite. Huge intelligence miscalculations of Russia, and in assessment of unity of collective West in support of Ukraine. Germany is supporting Kiev with our defense. Berlin is helping to protect our capital. Madrid, Paris, Amsterdam, Warsaw, these capitals are helping Ukraine, and Moscow now, it's only one capital, which is staying all alone. And on May the 9th, Mr. Putin was sitting in the Red Square, absolutely desperate, still playing in his favorite game to be glorified, but by whom? Nobody came to celebrate victory and great patriotic war, because Putin started the war which will bring Russia to humiliation defeat. And collective West, united West, supportive Ukraine. That's the best response to Russian aggressive ambitions.
Well, Colonel Siromakha, thank you very much for your enlightening discussion and your presentation, and look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.